Welcome to Automates, the podcast that brings you musings from thought leaders and industry pioneers who are shaping the way we work, think, and succeed. Each episode is packed with insights, expert interviews, and practical tips that will inspire and empower you to take your business to the next level. So tune in, subscribe, and get ready to innovate with Automates. Hello, Chrissie. Welcome to Automates, our little podcast. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Lovely to be on your podcast.
Awesome. What, podcast slash video slash, I don't really know what to call it these days, but everyone's got a podcast, so it's all fine. It's all fine. So apart from the nearly 49,000 people that follow you in LinkedIn, why don't you presume that nobody knows anything about you and do a quick intro? And we'll get started and have a quick discussion around all things Chrissie.
Sure. Thank you very much for that kind intro. So I'm Chrissie. I wear a few different hats within the law. I have been a lawyer for over 10 years now. I'm still a lawyer. I run my own medical negligence litigation practice under Nexa, which is a consultancy platform. Also, alongside that, have my own consulting business called LAB Consultancy, where I consult for law firms and legal teams around various aspects of transformation, but primarily the kind of cultural element, attraction, retention of talent, that side of things, and how that sort of blends with the technological aspects and the sort of mindset and all of those things. So those are my two primary businesses. Alongside that, I do a lot of social media content, as you mentioned there. So 45,000 followers on LinkedIn, 75,000 now on TikTok, which is my biggest platform.
What?
Actually, where, yeah. Which is my biggest platform for talking about legal content, from everything to do with my day job to legal education to helping future lawyers understand a little bit more about the marketplace to news articles, all sorts of things, all things law over on TikTok at the TikTok Lawyer. So yeah, it's quite a varied life that I live. I do quite a bit of public speaking as well at events. Multiple different hats, but still very much a lawyer.
So we could talk about a whole bunch of things that don't even touch the lawyer kind of world. So that's fine. So what you're telling me is that because I'm old and I'm not on TikTok, I should be on TikTok. That's basically what you're saying.
I'd say everybody should be on social media, but I would always pick the platform which is right for you, depending on what you're trying to achieve with your social media. So if TikTok isn't going to achieve your goals for you, then maybe that's not the one to focus on. I'd say, get on social media definitely, but pick your platform wisely in terms of what you want to get from it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I remember back in the day sort of being on Twitter in 2000 and I don't even know. It was early days. I remember just sort of being in this little window of going, is anyone talking about anything that I'm interested in? And I was just using it I used it as a sponge. I didn't really create a lot. But it's I agree with you. Social is good, but I've never taken it to the level that you seem to have taken it to with the success that you have. So congratulations. It's awesome.
Thank you.
So we're going to try and talk about everything in the next 30 minutes, and I don't know how we're going to do that. But one of the things that intrigued me about you was sort of this literal ability to wear multiple hats and do multiple things and sort of focus in on that. But I think one of the things that we were just talking before we started around sort of working within Nexa and understanding what that looks like, it sounds like and feels like you're able to sort of create your own sort of space to deliver the practice that you want without sort of the burdens of going off and building your own law firm. Talk to me about Nexa and sort of the dynamic that affords you and what that looks like.
Yeah, so for a bit of background, I was at Irwin Mitchell for the better part of 8 years. So that's where I got my training contract, and that's where I stayed until I was 5 or 6 years qualified. So that's where I kind of started my legal life, and it was a firm that I always wanted to work for. But alongside practicing as a solicitor there, I also started what I didn't know then was going to be a side hustle, which was my YouTube channel, which basically started off being a resource just for law students, talking about my journey into law, which was quite convoluted. I didn't have great A levels, I didn't have the usual lawyer credentials, and still kind of managed to fight my way in. So I started on YouTube telling that story back in 2017. And what that then kind of morphed into was kind of more industry insight. I particularly started talking about tech because I thought that that was going to have a pretty big impact on the industry from what I was reading and what I was hearing. And I kind of stayed very much on the forefront of what was happening in the legal market so that I could kind of report on it for YouTube to help students. So that then started its whole kind of separate line of interest in the law and understanding the business of law. And actually it made much more sense to me in totality when I understood both the business of law and actually the practice of law. And I don't think personally that's really taught enough in universities and law schools from an education point of view, because everything made much more sense to me in my career once I kind of understood the holistic legal marketplace and why things work the way they did. And so I kind of made a priority of learning about that. And that kind of led me into being interested in lots of different aspects of the law, because it's all relevant really to being a good lawyer, is understanding the entire ecosystem. And also when you join a law firm, you're kind of pigeonholed into being a fee earner, and this is your cost target, this is your time target. And actually the wider workings of the firm are not really explained to you until you get much further down the line. And actually, for me, I think partly because I have ADHD as well, for me, I wanted to understand the whole. I needed to understand why that was my cost target and why I had to bill this many hours a day for me to actually do it. So I kind of ended up teaching myself the kind of wider workings of why the legal profession was the way it was and why law firms operated the way that they did. And that gave me an interest in kind of wider things. So I ended up leaving IM in 2021 after kind of a long deliberation about whether I wanted to start up my own practice, whether I wanted to start my own business. I always knew that I wanted to sort of do something at some point. I probably wouldn't be employed forever. My dad was an entrepreneur as well, and I definitely had that spirit that I wanted to create something of my own at some point, but it was just kind of getting that timing right. Turns out the timing is never right. I think most entrepreneurs say that actually there's no perfect moment when everything is aligned and you're like, yes, this is the exact business, this is the exact right time to do it. For me, it kind of culminated in COVID. And I think a lot of people say you make that change when the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the pain of changing. And that's kind of the point I got to. It wasn't necessarily the right point to make the call, but actually it was just, I just don't think I can do this anymore. I think COVID was difficult for a lot of people. But obviously just the way the systems went, and we weren't particularly digitally equipped to be kind of fully online, and it became very, very difficult actually. And that was the point. I ended up moving to Dubai. Long story. Had been working there for about 6 months when IM said to me, oh, we're going to open the office soon, you really need to come back. And during lockdown, I'd built up this kind of really big online profile, which just kind of skyrocketed during that period because suddenly everybody was online, come 2020, because everybody was in lockdown. And it was kind of like I have all these inquiries for work. And I think if there was any time for me to move, it would be now. And at least I've got kind of the inquiries there. I've got clients lined up. I can make the move relatively seamlessly without worrying where my first paycheck is going to come from, which is what a lot of people worry about. So I set up LAB Consultancy, which actually initially was just a patchwork of things, patchwork of people and companies that I'd always wanted to work with in some capacity. I started off working with Mark Cohen, who you probably know. So I started off working with him at the Digital Legal Exchange, which was a kind of members community for large sort of global in-house teams going through digital transformation. So I ended up being the director of operations for that company for a couple of years actually, and learning a lot about the kind of corporate side and how transformation was, and particularly technology, was affecting those sorts of teams, because I'd never done the in-house side and I'd also only done the kind of personal injury and medical law side. So it was kind of really interesting, having known a lot about it through just kind of my own personal education. I moved over to that side to really kind of see the inner workings of that, which was really interesting. And I learned a huge amount about technology, a huge amount about how to kind of build teams and work together. And through that, I worked with a number of other members of the Digital Legal Exchange as well on the kind of talent and attraction and retention piece, which was awesome. So that's how LAB was born. But actually, when I left IM, I always still wanted to litigate. I've always had a real passion for what I do, which is medical negligence. That's just always been the kind of side of practice that I've always wanted to do. I've always really, really cared about helping people, and I always want to do the personal side rather than the business side. But I
Yeah.
was always interested in the business side from the kind of operational side. So it was kind of nice to be doing kind of both of those things. But what I always really wanted to do was carry on practicing. So shortly after I set up LAB, I also then joined Nexa. So Nexa is a consulting platform, as you mentioned in your question, which is kind of similar to the other ones that you've heard of. So kind of very similar to something like Setfords, if you've heard of Setfords, or Keystone, those sorts of platforms. They all operate slightly differently. So Nexa, effectively, they don't give you any work, they don't find you any clients. So you join, you bring in all your own work, you're self-employed. And you pay Nexa a proportion of your profits, basically, effectively your billables that you bring in, you
Yeah.
pay them a proportion of your billables. The thing that I liked about Nexa particularly is that they kind of really encourage you to build your own practice and kind of build your own name. So you don't have to call yourself a partner or a consultant at Nexa if you don't want to. You can build your own brand, which is currently what I'm in the process of doing. And actually what they do is help people to kind of springboard into their own practices. So
Okay.
whereas a lot of people like join a consultancy and they stay, some people do stay consultants forever, because that's what they want to do. Whereas other people actually kind of use the platform to springboard off it, which is what I'm doing, to kind of build your practice, but almost with that safety net of having all of your regulatory aspects and a lot of your admin taken care of, your insurance taken care of by Nexa, by the platform. So if you are a sole founder like me, it actually really helps at the beginning to have a lot of that taken care
Okay.
of, whilst I can just really focus on building the client base and running the cases alongside my other company as well. So I can do all of those things because of the way Nexa operates, which works really well for me.
Yeah. I mean, if somebody can take my admin away, I'd be very happy, quite frankly. Very. I've got too
Yeah.
much. But no, it sounds really interesting because I think obviously, I think we might touch on the whole COVID timing, sort of post COVID, and talk about the cultural impact of what that meant to people and
Mm.
aspiring lawyers, existing lawyers, like working from home, all that sort of stuff. We'll maybe come back to that. But I think you're it sounds really interesting. It sounds like you're an entrepreneur desperate to break out of the confines of what is normally a very conventional sort of legal world that people they train and they qualify and they do this and they do that and they work for a law firm or they go private practice or they go and do that or they go and do this or and actually you're driving a slightly different narrative which I think is really well it's really cool but it's also it, from what I know of you, Chrissie, it's sort of it's you. You're always looking to do something slightly different or want to be pushing the boundaries of what is the convention because that's
Mm.
there's always every industry needs some people like you, if that makes sense, because it's always about everyone talks about innovation, but actually innovation typically is just evolution. It's not really innovation in the grand scheme of things, but you're sort of taking that whole idea of okay, well, what do I want to be when I grow up? What kind of business do I want to work for? What are the people that I want to help? And how can I facilitate all of that whilst still practicing what I care about? And I think that's really amazing.
Thank you. That's very kind. Yeah, I mean, I think it's, as I said, possibly my ADHD brain, but for me, kind of wanting to build my own firm, I just wanted to understand everything. And I thought, actually, just learning about fee earning in a big firm is not going to teach me how to build that. And actually, if I really want to be a good lawyer and a good business owner, I need to understand the whole puzzle and all the pieces that fit into that. And it makes me a much more passionate and a better lawyer, I think, for understanding all of those parts and getting experience in all of those elements rather
Yeah,
than just kind of jumping straight from fee earner to law firm owner. So that's just the way I saw it. And I just find, I love the law and, I find it fascinating in all of its aspects. It's not just that I enjoy the paycheck at the end of the month. I do genuinely enjoy how it's evolved and how it's evolving.
yeah.
And it's a passion as well as a job. That sounds very contrived, but it is, genuinely it is.
But I mean, but I think that's the thing. You try and find something that you know nobody really wants to wake up on a Monday morning and go to work. But if you can find something that you either care about enough or have a team around you that you've built that sort of focuses on, that there are reasons to get up, there are
Mm.
reasons to go through. It's not just sort of turning it over to the soul of the, I just, you got to
Yeah.
believe in what you're doing. I'm going to touch on something that we
Yeah.
haven't said that we would talk about, but you've mentioned it twice, so I feel like it's a safe space. You
Okay.
referring to, on your LinkedIn profile, your last bit on your profile says ADHD, and you've
Mm.
mentioned it a couple of times. And I think, and I don't know if it's a topic of conversation or not, but I think over the years, and I've got family members who suffer from mental health challenges and various other bits and pieces. But actually, I'm not saying ADHD is a challenge, but what I'm saying is that it's really different to see somebody talking about it and almost using it as a superpower, maybe, if that makes sense. You're just referring to the fact that if it wasn't for that, then you wouldn't be doing ABCD. I think that's really brave. I think that's really amazing. So I don't know if it's a topic of conversation, but I think for talking about it, I think it's really, really refreshing and open and awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I owe most of my successes to ADHD and also most of my failures. I would
Yeah.
say it's a blessing and a curse. Absolutely. It comes, and everybody's ADHD is different, by the way. So it's not a case that you can say like someone with ADHD is always going to have ABC, be great at
Mm.
all of these things, because actually everybody presents differently in terms of their struggles and the things that they, really, really excel at. So for me, I've had to, and since having the diagnosis, I've actually learned much more what those things are, because I think until you get the diagnosis, you just kind of go through life just accepting things. You don't necessarily overanalyze why you really enjoy certain things or why certain things go really well and other things you can't do. You just kind of bulldoze through and
Yeah.
get on, which was kind of my life in private practice, to be honest, not really fully understanding why certain things were such a struggle and why certain things seemed to be really easy and really fun. And then I got the diagnosis, and then it kind of made perfect sense as to why some things about being in practice I just really, really struggled with, and other aspects, and weirdly, the more complicated aspects were the bits that I found much more enjoyable and much easier, and that tallies generally pretty well with what ADHD is experienced, because it's about kind of levels of dopamine, and actually things that are more complicated and require more focus and more of your brain. Actually, your brain is able to concentrate on those things better than things which require very little concentration and therefore kind of very low stimulation. So you often get this kind of backwards scenario where people with ADHD are just terrible at doing really basic things like sending basic emails or diary management or doing the kind of routine stuff, but are exceptionally good at kind of the really, really difficult stuff. So I didn't have the diagnosis, I said, in practice, but I kind of realized that actually I had all these interests, and there were certain parts of being a lawyer that I absolutely loved, but there was also all of these other things that I was interested in around technology and around the talent piece and around legal education. And I kind of looked at my days and thought, you know what, there are actually enough hours in the day to do this. If I cut out all the things about being a lawyer that I don't like and focus on the bits that I do like, I would then have all of this extra time to focus on all the other things that I do like. And that was kind of how my legal life was born in 2021. I just said, right, let's rethink this and let's focus on trying to only do things which I'm genuinely really good at and really enjoy, and let's try and cut out all the things that I don't. And that's how I've kind of got the balance that I've got now. And I think when you are trying to build a life like that, like something's got to give somewhere. You can't be a full-time lawyer and a full-time consultant and be doing legal
Yeah.
education and be producing all of this content. So I've had to kind of look at it and say, okay, I'm not going to be able to do 100% of all of these things. Actually, I need to work out where my percentages are. And actually being at Nexa is really helpful, because a lot of that admin is taken away. It's kind of the practice that I always wanted to do, in terms of that I'm focusing on the really interesting stuff. And actually, I'm just about to hire somebody to take on some of the stuff which, I'm enjoying less, to be honest. And Nexa takes care of a lot of the administrative side. And I'm like, great, now I've got all of this time where I'm still practicing, I'm still doing the bits that I love, which is the client content, the high level, high level litigation stuff, but I've actually cut out all of that other rubbish that I was required to do when I was in a big law firm. And now I can use that other time to actually do create my content, and I can do smaller consultancy projects with companies that I really want to work for, and I do have time to create content. So actually, by just kind of rearranging things slightly and changing the role slightly, I have managed to find time for those things. But you can't be 100% of five things. You can
Yeah.
do five things, but you can't do them all 100%. So you have
No.
to figure out how to do those things. And actually the way I've done it is by hiving off a lot of the admin around those things. So I'm actually just kind of focusing on the core bits, which I find the most valuable and interesting.
No, it makes sense. And it's interesting. You sort of talked about changing the roles, but I think it's also changing the rules. I mean, typically you get told how things should work. You run a business, you do ABC. You work as a lawyer, you do ABC. Blah blah blah.
Mm.
And actually, you've gone stuff that. I'm going to go do something. I'm going to do something that suits me and helps me get more fulfillment, but also helps me be a better lawyer because I can focus on other bits and pieces and everything else. And I think it takes a bit of, well, it takes actually probably two or three things to go off and do that. But to do it in such a different way, it takes the confidence and the bravery to go off and do it. But actually, I know there is a ton of my job that I don't like doing, but I end up having to do it because I'm not as brave as you, quite frankly. But you look at it and you go, like, actually, well, actually, there is stuff that I don't like doing, and that's why it's always the last thing that I do, which is always the reason why it gets left till tomorrow, or I end up relying on somebody else to do it. But I think there's that dynamic of sort of pushing out and thinking about, okay, well, it's not just changing roles; it's changing the rule book. You're changing the rule book of what that means because you're you're giving it your best shot, and I think, as you say, that comes with a bit of failure, a lot of success, but you learn from those sort of experiences and everything else. So, no, it sounds amazing. It sounds cool.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and I try and I heard somewhere a couple of years ago that every week you should try and get rid of your 5% of your kind of least valuable work.
Yeah,
And that's sort of, I mean, I by no means achieve that every week. Most weeks I forget to do it, but that's kind of in my mind at all times, that actually I'm always trying to look at what I'm least enjoying, and actually either see if that can be automated or if there's technology that can help to actually work with some of those things, take them off my hands, or is that something that I need to hire for? And it's not always possible to hire somebody overnight. You don't have the funds, you don't have the right person. But actually, I do try and keep a tally of saying, actually, this is the stuff that I feel like I enjoy the least, or is least profitable, or actually is the least good use of my time and
yeah,
skills. And it kind of goes on a chart and says, right, okay, this is the stuff that we need to work on. And that's how you can try and keep in balance, and you can kind of keep narrowing how much time you're spending on things, which means you can keep that balance of things that you're always enjoying. If you're always kind of hiving off 5% of things that you're not enjoying, it keeps giving you more time to spend on the things that you are enjoying. So that's the plan. It doesn't always go to plan, but that is always in my mind as something that I'm constantly trying to do, to make sure I'm always kind of staying with doing the things that I'm passionate about and I think are good uses of my time.
So I'm going to say something terrible. Without really thinking about it, I sort of sat there and went, well, 5% every week. That means I'm out of a job in 20 weeks. That sounds perfect. But obviously you mean cumulative 5% every week. So I get it, but I'm trying to work out how I'd do
Yeah.
that.
And you replace it. The idea is you replace it with doing 5% of the more profitable, more enjoyable things. So
Yeah.
actually, it's not that you're losing all that; you're just replacing it with more valuable stuff.
Can we write the rule book so that I do lose 5%? At least once a month,
Until you're just
once every
retired, you're
two
just
months, once
chilling.
a quarter. Once a quarter
Yeah,
would be wonderful. Um,
yeah,
so you talk about being a content creator. You like 75,000 people on TikTok and blah blah blah. All these numbers, too many zeros. But sort of the resounding focus of your content is sort of helping sort of new and aspiring and even pre that lawyers come into the legal world and give them advice and help them sort of understand what options they are and what pathways they've got and all that sort of stuff. What I guess my question is sort of, does your, because you mentioned earlier your background of a less than conventional pathway into legal or into the law, is that what drove you to have that mind's eye of, actually, if only there was somebody like me telling somebody like
mm.
me 8, 9, 10 years ago and giving me some advice and tips? Is that where it started?
Absolutely, yeah. Because because I had such terrible A levels and I had kind of no connections in law really, the people that I did speak to were kind of very politely like, you know what, I think, you know, you should just, it's really nice that you want to be a lawyer, but you're not really cut out for this. And, you know, people that I asked for work experience just said, you know, it's not really worth our time or yours. So, which actually, because I'm slightly, well, I'm
Nice.
very rebellious, I think, but a lot of people would have taken that and gone, okay, would have listened and said, you know what, fine, I'll go and do something else. I'll go and be I don't know, gardener or a painter or something that's non-academic, because not there's anything wrong with that. But if that's what you're told, quite often that's what you go and do. But I didn't, and I said, well, that I'm grossly offended by that, and I'm going to prove that I can do this. And a lot of it was driven by that kind of that sort of fire that was ignited by people telling me that I couldn't do this and it was a waste of my time. And so I didn't give up, and I did finally find some people who gave me work experience. You know, I kind of fought my way to a training contract through many rounds of rejection by building up my CV in other ways, basically, and trying to get really good work experience and other kind of really interesting skills. Because I just, you know, there's not much you can do with academics. You know, you can't really get around them, so you have to be able to kind of build up something else that is of interest and of value on a CV, which is what I did. But I did start the channel because it struck me that I'd never really known anyone with a similar story. Most people who had similar stories to me had been told that they wouldn't be successful in academic careers and they'd gone and done something else. And I thought that was a real shame, actually, because not to say that, you know, they didn't have a great life and they weren't happy, but actually, you know, it's not right that you can't succeed, you know, if you do have these A levels and you do have this background, you don't have connections, and, you know, you went to state school, you know, it's this kind of, you know, this sort of conception of the law that you have to be from this elitist background and you have to be kind of top of the top in everything to get through the process. And I just thought, you know, that's not me, that's not me at all. And, you know, I haven't done any of those things. And I think it's important to kind of tell my story, given the fact that I was at the top 20 law firm at the time, and thought, you know what, this is an important story to tell, actually, because I do want people who've been put in this position not to just take what they're told as read and go, okay, this person's judged me based on this piece of paper and said I'm not going to be able to do this, so off I go and do something else. You know, I wanted to encourage people to challenge that and not just accept what they're told at face value. So I wanted to tell that story, and I was already mentoring people kind of face to face, but I had 3 mentees and I was an NQ. So I was like, you know what, I can't actually take on any more physical mentees at the moment because I wouldn't be doing them justice and with my time. And one of my friends was a YouTuber. She vlogged about like beauty and Disney and all sorts of things, nothing to do with kind of professional, her job or anything like that. But I just kind of saw these numbers on her videos, and she was getting kind of hundreds of thousands of views. And I thought, imagine if I could reach that many people with, you know, a couple of hours of my time on a weekend, because at the moment I'm only managing 3, but actually, you know, the internet, it's free, you know, it's an accessible resource, anybody can be watching that from any background, from anywhere. So it's exactly the kind of market that I want to reach. It's not just the people who can afford law schools, etc. So I just started it, and I just thought, you know what, what's the worst that can happen? You know, I'll give it a go and I knew that it was going to be slow going. I didn't expect to get loads of views overnight or anything like that, and it was slow going. Legal Cheek actually picked it up about 3 or 4 months in. I think it was only my parents who were watching it for for like the first few months, genuinely. And then Legal Cheek picked it up, ran an article, and then it basically took off from there, because I got kind of 300 or 400 followers, or subscribers as they were then, on YouTube, kind of overnight from that article. And suddenly it was worth it. Suddenly it's like, wow, like, you know, 300 people are watching this. Like that's enough. That's a real difference if people are really engaging like that. So that was kind of enough to keep it going. And then it's kind of moved with the time. So I don't do much on YouTube anymore. I moved on to Instagram, and then Twitter and LinkedIn, and now kind of TikTok. So it's kind of evolved, and it's had to, because I don't have enough capacity to manage 7 platforms at a time. So my main focuses now are LinkedIn and TikTok, because that's where I kind of see the biggest traction, and that's also kind of what fulfills my goals with it in terms of the audience that's on there.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I've ended up there on social media, because it, you know, those are the 2 platforms which I think are the most beneficial for me, really.
Yeah. And I think, you know, most people, and me included, this podcast is affiliated to Autologics. This is not a sales pitch in any way, shape or form. You know, we create content so that people have some kind of linking to brand. I think, you know, you're creating content to help people. There is linking to your brand, but ultimately the main purpose, and having that many, you wouldn't have that many subscribers and followers and likes and all that sort of stuff if you weren't actually making a difference and adding value. And it sounds like, you know, it sounds contrived, but it's not. You're there delivering a service for free to a bunch of people that are taking it, and whether they're 18, 19, 20, 22, 24, they're listening to it and going, actually, that helps me make a difference to what I'm trying to achieve and trying to do. And again, I sort of look at it, and it sort of sounds a bit bonkers, and I don't want to say it again, but it is that other person first attitude you don't see in social and content very often. You see it to try and generate revenue off ads and all that. I think, all credit to you for doing that. And I think that's probably why you've got so many followers, because it's genuine and it comes from somewhere that people can see is a direct relation to your background and your challenges and your sort of course as you've gone through your career. So I think that's it's a credit to you. I mean, I think it's awesome.
That's very kind. Thank you. Yeah, I have always kind of had in mind that the goal is to help others with my content. Of course, there's like stuff that's just entertaining and stuff that's fun on there as well. But and the result of it is that it is a great source of lead gen. But actually, that's never the focus of the videos. I'm not kind of on there hammering the sales pitch and all of that stuff, but it's just, if you are kind of consistently in the front of people's minds, it's clear what I do, people know what I do, it's in my headline, I mention it when I'm doing like day in the life, so everybody knows what I do. But actually, and if at any point they need my services, then they know that I'm there. But I don't need to constantly be ramming down people's throats the sales angle at all, because it doesn't help. It's not what my brand is about. It never has been about that. And actually, it has the opposite effect more often than not, because people are tired of being sold to. They don't go on TikTok really, or LinkedIn to look at adverts. Nobody wants that. So it has the effect of showing up day after day, just with useful content, and people know what I do. The link gets made without me having to like overtly make it. So it does work for Jen, but that's not the focus of my content.
No, and it's apparent. One quick thing before we wrap up. I know we've both got timeline deadlines and we're all both very busy people.
Yeah.
I saw a post on LinkedIn of yours in the last couple of weeks where you were talking about innovation, and you talked about it earlier, technology having a real driver for the impact on cultural sort of entities within a law firm, culture and innovation and technology changing things. And there was a statement that you made, which I don't think is your statement, but it was a statement that was made by somebody that you were at an event, which is there's going to be less lawyers, but there's going to be more interesting jobs. Is that how you see sort of the rise of AI and all the malarkey around AI? We've gone, damn it, we've gone like 35 minutes and nobody's mentioned AI, but I've just broken it. But is that how you see sort of the short to middle term? Is it going to be less lawyers and more interesting jobs? Do you agree with what the chap was saying at that event?
Yeah, so that was actually the founder of From Council, who said that, and he said it in the launch of his partnership with Legora. And what I went on to say in that post was actually that I don't necessarily think that there will be less of them, but I think the role of a lawyer and what the definition of a lawyer is will be different. So I think there will be less lawyers as we know them, absolutely. And I think, what a lot of the work that lawyers have historically done will be different. So I don't necessarily think there will be less jobs, but there will just be less of the traditional lawyer that we know of. Because I think those statements can sometimes kind of freak out paralegals and aspiring lawyers and people who are practicing at the moment, thinking I'm going to lose my job, or like, am I wasting my time? And I absolutely don't think that's the case. I think, the world has been evolving. The profession's been evolving forever. There's just a constant stream of evolution. I think because of how quickly, particularly generative AI, has changed certain things, everyone's sort of freaking out that everything's going to change overnight. I don't think that's the case. I think there will be a slow evolution, the same way that there always has. What trainees are doing now is nothing like what I was doing when I was a trainee. I spent half my time doing manual, literally reviewing paper documents, putting together physical bundles, checking them. I mean, about half what I did as a trainee no longer exists, and that was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's what will happen. Those jobs will evolve and they will change, but they're not going to be obliterated.
No.
And there's not going to be kind of no place for these highly skilled, highly educated lawyers. They're just going to have a different role, and they're going to be involved in slightly different parts of the process. And I read something recently that said something like, I can't remember the percentage now. I think it was something like 80% of the jobs that will exist in 2035 haven't even been invented yet, or something along those lines, which I can believe, because they're all going to be new jobs that relate
Yeah.
to our favourite subject, AI, no doubt. But actually, it's, yes, some jobs will look a lot different, but I'm not panicked about it. I don't think anybody should be panicked about it, because we'll evolve and we will adapt, and
Yeah.
everybody who is highly skilled will have jobs. I don't think that's the issue. It's just that job's going to look very different in a good way. I mean, it's music to my ears as an ADHD. Great. It's going to be a much more interesting job. All of the rubbish is going to be hived off to
Yeah.
tech, and we can just do the really interesting bits. Brilliant. It's great. It's great for me. So I'm really excited, and maybe if I'd come in as a trainee now, maybe I'd still be in private practice. Who knows? Because maybe my job would look a lot different, and a lot of that stuff that I hated would be gone now. So I think it's a great time. I think it's a really exciting time for junior lawyers to come into the profession. I think they're going to learn a lot more. They're going to do a lot less dull grunt work, and I just think it is going to be a much more interesting job, definitely.
And a lot of them are digital natives. They're walking in and they at least know how to use this tech. It's not like there's a generational gap or anything else. I mean, I work in tech and I am not technology. It doesn't work. But 18, 19, 25, 24. These people have lived with technology. They know what to do. They know how to do it.
Totally.
When will I see you in human form next? When are you speaking at
Oh,
another event? Where are you going to be at Legal Tech Talk? Are you going to Legal Geek
I was just
Growth?
I was about to say, I don't think I'm doing Growth Geek this year, but
Okay.
I am moderating a session on the death of the billable hour at Legal Tech Talk,
Okay,
which
cool.
I'm quite excited about. So yeah, so a few things coming up over the summer, actually a few things that I'm speaking at. So yeah, hopefully we'll cross paths at one of those.
I'm sure we will. Chrissie, always love chatting to you. Thank you very much for taking the time out, and I will catch you very soon.
You're very welcome. Speak soon.
Take it easy. Bye.
Bye.